Alexandre Daigle, Patrik, Stefan, and Yakupov. 3 number 1 overall picks who were supposed to change the game, but ended up changing it for all the wrong reasons. They weren't only top picks, they were sold as franchise saviors, the next great superstars of the NHL. But instead of leading dynasties, they became living reminders that hype doesn't equal success. From Daigle's infamous quote about being drafted number 1, to Stefan's unforgettable open net blunder, to Yakupov's chaotic rise and fall. Each of these stories is a masterclass in how quickly things can go off the rails. Their failures didn't just disappoint the fans, they derailed entire organizations. So what went wrong? And what can we learn from some of the most brutal draft busts in NHL history? Today, we'll break it down. The weight of the number 1 pick. The weight of the number 1 pick isn't only about draft position, it's about everything that's attached to it. From the second your name is called, you're not only the best player of your class, you're also presented as the new hope for a franchise. For teams, it signals change. For fans, it suggests a savior has arrived. That spotlight instantly makes a teenager the face of an entire organization. And more often than not, the pressure builds faster than the player can grow. Look at Alexandre Daigle, a number 1 pick in 1993 who quickly became a household name even before his skates touched the ice. Reports at the time would frame him as a generational talent, someone expected to change the league while restoring a struggling team's future. While the praise looked flattering from a distance, for a teenager just entering professional hockey, it meant that every shift was graded against impossible standards. Instead of being allowed to learn and adapt, his early career would be shaped by constant comparisons and the assumption that he would dominate from day one. The gap between hype and reality left him very little margin for patience, and the pressures followed him through every step. What happened when the games actually began is even more telling. Years later, Yakupov faced a different version of that same burden. When he was drafted first overall, the Edmonton Oilers were already in a cycle of losing seasons. Fans and management alike were restless, having seen other high draft picks come and go without delivering the turnaround they had hoped for. And by the time that Yakupov was selected, the story wasn't only about excitement, it was about him being the player who finally had to pull the franchise out of its mess. That meant a spotlight brighter than most rookies can handle. And the storyline wasn't can he adjust, but how soon will he carry us. In that setting, even small mistakes are magnified. Every missed scoring opportunity became more than just one bad play. It was spun as another reason to question whether he was the answer. The narrative hanging over his head grew heavier than his actual development on the ice, and the real test would come when those expectations clashed with his early seasons in the NHL. Patrik Stefan experienced his own version of this when he entered the league as the top pick for a brand new franchise, the Atlanta Thrashers. Unlike Daigle, who had joined a struggling but established team, or Yakupov, who entered an organization desperate for a savior, Stefan became the face of a team with no past at all. He wasn't just another promising young player, he was in many ways the first defining figure of the franchise, which meant that he had to carry all the responsibilities far more than most prospects would face, without the benefit of strong veteran locker room support or organizational stability. The challenge wasn't only about his personal game, it was about filling a role for which no teenager could ever truly be ready. And the question was never simply about skill, it was about identity, and whether he could somehow stand as the cornerstone of something that did not yet exist. And as we'll see, one mistake later in his career would come to overshadow everything else in his life. What ties these stories together is how quickly expectations overtook development. From the moment each player was drafted, media headlines, fan excitement, and organizational hope created walls around them, leaving no room for steady growth. Talent alone was not enough to survive that kind of storm. The struggles that players faced weren't only about missed goals or shaky performances, they were about the collision between youth and the crushing demands piled onto them before they ever had a chance to settle. And once the draft night celebrations faded, reality always set in. The question then became, how well could these highly touted players cope When hype met unstable environments, bad luck, and defining mistakes. And that's where the true stories begin. When talent meets turmoil. Once the draft spotlight dims and reality sets in, talent often collides with instability. This is where When Talent Meets Turmoil begins. A closer look at how promise alone could not overcome the environments these players were dropped into. Take Alexandre Daigle, for instance. He had the skill set that coaches dream about: speed, puck handling, vision, but he stepped into an Ottawa team that was in its earliest years and still struggling to find its footing. The organization had lacked the stability that often helps young players to thrive. Leadership changes and an unclear sense of direction would leave Daigle without the support system he needed. Instead of a gradual development curve, every mistake would be amplified under the bright lights of high expectation, and before long, critics weren't only analyzing his progress, they were stamping him with a reputation. The bigger story would not be his stats, it was how little room he had to grow in an unsettled environment. And you have to ask, what would his career have looked like had he landed with a franchise already built to nurture their top picks? Nail Yakupov's road looked different but carried many of the same issues. Edmonton had already spent years piling up high draft selections, each promoted as the player who would change everything. And when Yakupov arrived, patience in the city was already thin. His early promise was undercut by frequent changes in coaching and systems that would keep him from building a steady role. One year he was pushed to play an all-out offensive game, and the next he would be told to focus on defense and positioning. The constant resetting of expectations would prevent him from developing confidence in any one approach, and without continuity in how he was used to, flashes of talent could not grow into consistency. Over time, the narrative became hard. Yakupov was not delivering, when in reality, he wasn't being given the stability to succeed. And the real question became whether any young player could have thrived under those circumstances. Then there's Patrik Stefan. Drafted to be the face of Atlanta's expansion franchise, he carried expectations larger than simply playing well. He would be asked to define a team's identity. That challenge is heavy enough, but what ultimately became his defining moment would not be tied to a season or a championship race. It was one misstep late in his career with Dallas, the missed empty net goal. It should have been routine, yet one single clip was replayed over and over again, sticking to him in a way that overshadowed his entire body of work. Whether it was fair or not, many fans remember him only for that moment alone. When one highlight becomes shorthand for a career, everything else becomes erased. How different would his reputation look without that one single play dominating the conversation? For all three, the common thread would be how outside narratives would shape their legacy. Once media and fans reached for words like bust, it became the lens through which every game would be judged. Quiet nights, injuries, even flashes of brilliance, they were all filtered through that label. And once a storyline like that takes hold, it doesn't stay on the page. It follows players into interviews, dressing rooms, and often into their own self-image. Many who have spoken about similar experiences in the league note that the mental strain of living under constant criticism lasts far longer than the playing days themselves. And what's worth remembering is that each of these players built a life beyond the NHL. Away from the nightly scrutiny, they found ways to move forward from careers that were defined by headlines more than results. And that leaves us with a bigger thought. If the hype and instability can warp the path of a top draft pick so profoundly, what does that say about the culture that creates those expectations in the first place? These stories remind us that the hype culture can be just as damaging as it is exciting. Before they ever play a game, young athletes will often carry the burden of an entire franchise's hopes. Players need time, patience, and steady coaching to grow, but all too often they're judged as finished products from day one. But now it's your turn. Which of these number one picks do you think face the most harsh treatment? Be sure to share your thoughts in the comments down below, and if you enjoy these deep dives into draft history, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.